The jacaranda tree stood in full bloom, its branches stretching over the dusty schoolyard like a mother's arms. Purple petals drifted lazily to the ground, scattering across the worn pages of Tariro's chemistry textbook. She always came here after classes, drawn by the quiet shade and the way the world seemed to pause under its canopy. In this corner of Harare High, far from the chatter and stomping feet, she could think clearly. The jacaranda had been her study companion for years, watching silently as she prepared for each exam, each quiz, each hurdle that life placed in her path. Tariro was not from a wealthy family. Her mother was a seamstress who worked long hours in a cramped shop, the whirring of her sewing machine keeping pace with the ticking of unpaid bills. Her father had left when she was 10, leaving behind a trail of empty promises and a faded photograph. Education was Tariro's ladder out of struggle, and every day under the jacaranda was another rung climbed. She measured her life not in birthdays but in chapters of textbooks completed. On a Wednesday afternoon in September, as the sun dipped lower and the shadows of the jacaranda stretched across the grass, a voice interrupted her reading. "You're Tariro, right? The one who tutors." She looked up to find a boy standing there, tall, clean-shaven, and dressed in a crisp white shirt that still smelled faintly of laundry starch. His shoes gleamed as though they had never touched dust. "I'm Tendai," he continued, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I failed my exams. My parents think I need help." The way he said help was heavy, reluctant, as though the word had teeth. Tariro studied him for a moment, sensing both pride and desperation in his eyes. "Sit," she said finally, closing her textbook. "If you're willing to learn, I'll teach you." From the start, Tariro made her expectations clear. "We meet here on time 3 days a week," she said, pointing to the jacaranda as if it were a witness to their contract. "You do the homework I give you. And you ask questions when you don't understand." Tendai nodded, though the slight roll of his shoulders suggested he wasn't used to being told what to do. Still, he lowered himself to the grass, placing his sleek leather backpack beside him as though afraid it might get dirty. They began with algebra, a subject Tendai clearly hated. He scribbled quickly, skipping steps, and looked up each time as if to check if he was done. Tariro pushed the paper back toward him. "Show you're working," she said. "Math isn't magic, it's a trail of footprints. If you can't follow them, you'll get lost." Overhead, the jacaranda swayed gently, scattering another handful of purple petals over their books. By the end of the first hour, Tendai's perfect posture had softened, and his forehead bore the faint crease of concentration. When they packed up, Tendai lingered. "My parents want me in the UK next year," he said suddenly, his voice quieter now. "They don't believe in this place. But they said I can only go if I pass my retakes." His eyes held something she couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe, or longing. Tariro met his gaze evenly. "Then let's make sure you pass," she said. The jacaranda rustled overhead as if in agreement. They settled into their rhythm like a song learned by heart. Tariro arrived first, laying out pens and past papers, and Tendai came a few minutes later, always with that faint smell of cologne and a new resolve in his eyes. She explained quadratic factorization with bottle caps, sliding them across the grass to show roots and coefficients. He frowned, then laughed when the pattern clicked. "It's like music," he said. "Chord progressions." She hadn't known he played piano. He hadn't known she loved old Bira tunes on the radio. Under the jacaranda, they traded pieces of themselves as naturally as they traded notes. To make progress visible, Tariro brought a clean jar from her mother's shop. For every problem Tendai solved correctly, fully, carefully, they dropped in one purple petal. At first the bottom looked bare, a shallow bruise of color. By the second week, the petals climbed like a rising tide. Whenever Tendai rushed, Tariro held up the jar. "Slow is smooth," she said. "And smooth becomes fast." He rolled his eyes, then smiled and started again, showing every step. One afternoon, a gust of wind sent a swirl of petals through the air like confetti. Tendai hooped, arms spread as if celebrating a goal. For a heartbeat, his laughter loosened the tightness he wore like a uniform. He admitted he hated disappointing people. His father, who measured success in imported suits. His mother, who spoke in careful sentences that ended in the word abroad. "I don't want to run away from here to look impressive somewhere else," he said. "I just don't want to fail again." Tariro looked at the jar, 3/4 full. "You're not failing," she said. "You're practicing courage." The first time they studied at his house, Tariro took a combi to Borrowdale and walked past electric gates and clipped hedges that smelled like money. Tendai met her at the driveway, waving off the guard who stared too long at her scuffed shoes. Inside the floor shone. The living room watched itself in a wall of glass. A maid offered juice on a tray as if Tariro were a guest and not a girl who had calculated bus fare to the last bond coin. They worked at a marble island in the kitchen. Tendai's mother drifted in, elegant as a magazine page, her perfume a soft snowfall. "So you're the tutor," she said, smiling without warmth. "Thank you for helping him catch up." Her gaze lingered on Tariro's second-hand backpack, then moved on as though she had catalogued every thread. When she left, Tendai exhaled. "She means well," he said. "She thinks well and means well, but sometimes she doesn't see." Tariro nodded, turning back to simultaneous equations. Numbers were fairer than people. As the sun slid down the glass, they took a break in the garden. Jacaranda petals from a neighbor's tree blew over the fence, purple boats landing on a manicured lawn. "Even here," Tariro murmured, surprised by the comfort of the color. Tendai plucked one and balanced it on her notebook. "Our trademark," he said. For the first time, his world and hers didn't feel like separate planets. They felt like two halves of a city, linked by the quiet work of understanding. Exams loomed like storm clouds. Tariro set a schedule, daily drills, timed past papers on weekends. Tendai struggled with time management. His answers were mostly right but rarely finished. "Your brain knows the road," Tariro said, setting a timer, "but your feet keep stopping to admire billboards." She taught him to underline verbs and questions, to circle key data, to leave spaces and come back. The jar of petals swelled, a throat full of color. The first full mock came back with a borderline pass. Tendai stared at the paper as if it had insulted him. "I worked," he said, voice flat. "I really worked." Tariro didn't soften it. "And you're closer," she replied. "We don't worship marks, we study the misses." They spread the scripts on the grass beneath the tree and autopsied each mistake. A careless sign, a dropped unit, a panicked guess. By the end, Tendai's shoulders had lowered. "Again," he said. "Let's do another." That evening, as shadows lengthened, he confessed the bargain his parents had offered. London if he passed, tutoring replaced by an education consultant if he didn't. "They trust professionals," he said. "They don't trust this." He gestured at the grass, the jar, the purple drift, "this homemade miracle." Tariro tapped his notebook. "We are not a miracle. We are method." He laughed, short and surprised, then stood to leave. Before he did, he added one last petal to the jar. "For faith," he said. "Not the kind you wait for, the kind you practice." The storm broke without warning, hot rain drumming on tin roofs, running in silver ropes off the jacaranda leaves. Tariro gathered their books, but Tendai tugged her to the trunk where the bark jutted like ribs, making a dry alcove. They crouched there, knees almost touching, the rest of the world rinsed to watercolor. "Well," he said, grinning, water on his lashes, "today's lab practical is hydrology." They read by the blue glow of his phone torch while the rain softened. Between problems, the talk drifted. He told her about piano lessons he'd quit after his father called them a hobby. She told him about her mother's hands, needle-pricked and steady, about nights the power cut and they studied by candle, measuring time in wax. Rain muffled the city, a thick blanket over its fuss. The jacaranda held steady, a cathedral roof of green and purple. When the downpour thinned to a hush, they stepped out to a world rewritten, puddles catching sky, branches beaded with light. Something in them had changed too, like a chord resolving. Tendai hesitated, then took her hand, brief, careful, as if asking a question he didn't yet have words for. Tariro didn't pull away. The moment was small and enormous, a seed split open in wet soil. They said nothing about it, returning to vectors, but the tree knew. It always knew. News traveled, the way it always does, without anyone admitting to carry it. A neighbor saw them walking, laughing too freely. A classmate noticed their session stretching long after the practice tests ended. In the Borrowdale kitchen, Tendai's parents sat him down. "Focus," his father said, cufflinks shining like warnings. "We hired a consultant." His mother's smile was velvet over steel. "This girl is sweet," she said, "but we don't know her methods." Tendai shook his head. "My methods are improving because of her." His father's jaw tightened. "People from different backgrounds can be distracting," he said carefully. "After you pass, you'll have friends who match your pace." The words landed like a gate slamming. Tendai left the room with a yes that meant nothing. The next day he texted Tariro to meet an hour earlier. They moved their sessions to dawn, when the grass was damp and the city still half asleep. In that pale light, the jacaranda seemed even more intimate, the petals bruised with dew, the air smelling of soap and fresh bread from a distant bakery. They worked harder. They also laughed more because laughter at dawn feels like an illicit luxury. Their hands found reasons to brush. Their eyes learned new maps of each other's faces. They didn't define anything because definitions were doors other people could close. They just studied, and in between they loved, quietly, correctly, precisely, as if love itself had a marking scheme only the tree could grade. The final weeks galloped. Tariro drew up a revision grid that covered their days in neat rectangles. Biology diagrams bloomed on scrap paper. Hearts, lungs, a leaf's vein work mirroring the jacaranda above them. For physics, they timed pendulums with a length of thread and a binder clip. English literature became a conversation about vow and choice, while math turned from enemy to dance. Tariro carried her own storm: a scholarship exam for the University of Zimbabwe, forms to fill, a teacher's recommendation to chase. At home, her mother hemmed a wedding dress late into the night and murmured, "You will go further than I ever did." The words wrapped around Tariro like a shawl. She wore them to the tree. On their last practice test, Tendai finished with 5 minutes to spare. He didn't guess, he reviewed. When the timer beeped, he set down his pen and looked at the jar. It was full to the neck, petals pressed like love letters. "No more space," he said. "We'll start a second," Tariro replied. He shook his head. "No. Let's keep it like this. Let it prove that there's enough." They cleaned their spot, careful to leave no litter, only footprints and a soft, purple scatter the wind would claim. Harare held its breath. At school, lists went up, names printed in black that decided futures. Tendai stood stiff in a crowd of sudden mathematicians and poets. He found his index number, then his grades, solid passes, not perfect but honest and hard-earned. Relief knocked the air out of him. He stepped back from the board, eyes wet, vision smearing into purple he imagined even here. He ran to the jacaranda. Tariro was already there, hands clasped at her chest, cheeks flushed like she'd sprinted. He didn't speak, he just nodded. She understood. They didn't shout. They sat, shoulder to shoulder, in a happiness so precise it didn't need volume. "My mother will be proud," he said. "Your mother will be prouder," she replied. He swallowed. "They'll still send me." The sentence landed between them, heavy as a suitcase. Tariro took a folded paper from her bag, her own letter. "I got the scholarship," she whispered. "It covers fees if I maintain my grades." They looked at each other, two victories crossing like trains at a station, whistles blowing in opposite directions. The jacaranda shed a handful of petals that landed in their laps like counsel. "We will not waste this," Tariro said. "Even if we don't get to keep everything." That evening they met not to study but to mark time. Purple light sifted through the tree, turning the air into a kind of stained glass. They spoke about practicalities, departure dates, class schedules, calling cards, Wi-Fi at his residence, Zisa outages at hers. Each logistics sentence felt like a disguise for another heartbeat. At some point, words thinned to a thread. Tendai's fingers brushed the braid at her temple, as if confirming she was real. Tariro reached up and held his hand there, a pause that became an answer. Their kiss was not cinematic. It was tender and human, a promise spoken in a language they had been learning all along. Patience, attention, proof. The jacaranda leaned over them like a chaperone who secretly rooted for love. When they pulled apart, they didn't make declarations. They tied a slender purple ribbon to a low branch, a small act that would say what they refused to carve into living bark. "We won't vandalize our witness," Tariro joked softly, and Tendai laughed in relief. They sat until the streetlights flickered on in the distance, the city returning to itself. Then they stood, already missing what they were still holding, and walked away in opposite directions, knowing they would circle back. Tendai's father hosted a dinner, a pre-departure celebration that felt like a business meeting disguised as a party. Men in suits discussed exchange rates. Women compared schools in faraway cities. Tendai moved through it like a polite ghost. When he spotted Tariro at the gate, simple dress, steady eyes, his heart righted itself. He had invited her despite his mother's hesitation. "It's not appropriate," she'd said. He had replied, "It's honest." Introductions were brittle. Someone asked Tariro if she'd been abroad. Someone else commented on how lucky she was to be so clever. She smiled, poured herself water, and refused to feel small. Later, as the grown-ups migrated toward cigars and decaf coffee, Tendai led her to the garden where the neighbor's jacaranda dusted the grass with familiar purple. "Our color follows," she said. He touched the back of her hand, a graze like a prayer. They spoke openly for the first time about fear, the ocean between them, the lull of new lives, the risk that love, like a language left unused, could rust. "Then we'll practice," Tariro said. Like we did everything else. They decided to write letters by hand, duplicates, one to send, one to fold and leave in the jar beneath their tree. The jacaranda at the party shivered, as if sharing news with its cousin across town. Inside, the speeches began. Outside, two teenagers drafted a faith that had nothing to prove to anyone but themselves. They met before sunrise on his final day. The city was a sketch in blue pencil, rooftops waiting for their color. The jacaranda breathed a cool scent, and the ribbon they tied fluttered like a pulse. They sat close, knees touching, hands clasped around a thermos of sweet tea that steamed in the cold. They didn't waste the hour. They read each other the first letters they had written. His was full of gratitude, for the way you made numbers tell the truth, and terror, for the space between flights and arrival. Hers was stern and kind, the way her teaching always was. You are not your marks but you are responsible for them. You are not your parents' plan but you are accountable to your own. They laughed, they cried, and when the first taxi horn sounded in the distance, they both looked up at the same time like birds hearing weather. He kissed her again, not longer, just deeper into memory. Then they knelt by the roots and lifted the flat stone where the jar slept. Inside, months of purple practice and 2 folded letters sealed with tape. Our witness, Tariro whispered. Tendai replaced the stone, palmed a single petal and slipped it into his wallet. At the road they let go. She did not go to the airport. They had agreed, their goodbye belonged to the tree. Distance taught them new arithmetic. Time zones became denominators. Calls were currencies to budget. When Wi-Fi failed in Harare they wrote on paper. When loneliness fogged his London window, he played the piano he had abandoned, coaxing out progressions that sounded like home. Letters flowed both ways, always in pairs. One crossing oceans, one tucked beneath a stone. Tariro began lectures, drinking knowledge like rain. At the University of Zimbabwe, she joined a study group, then led it, her explanations threaded with the same metaphors she'd given Tendai: boreholes and roads, billboards and footprints. She saved what she could from a campus job, bought her mother a better chair for the shop, and walked past the jacaranda most evenings. Sometimes she lifted the stone just to see the jar breathing with paper. Witness, she would say, and the tree would answer with a purple blink. Seasons turned. In London, Tendai learned to cook rice that didn't stick, to write essays that did. He sent photos of parks so green they looked edited. She sent voice notes of thunderheads rolling in from the southeast, of vendors singing at dusk. They did not promise forever. They promised frequency. And on nights when silence expanded like a roof with no beams, both of them whispered the other's name into their separate darks, trusting the tree to hear. Cracks when they came were ordinary. He missed a call, she missed too. A group project swallowed her weekends. A new social circle grazed his heart with a crush he didn't choose. When he confessed, haltingly, Tariro listened without theatrics. Thank you for telling me, she said. Honesty is not betrayal, it's maintenance. After they hung up, she walked to the jacaranda in a wind that threatened rain. The ribbon on the branch had faded to a soft, almost silver purple. A storm that night shook Harare awake. In the morning, a small branch had come down, the ground beneath the tree scuffed raw where the wind had worried it. Tariro lifted the stone and found the jar half buried under wet leaves, their duplicate letters damp but intact. She laid them out on her mother's ironing board and pressed them dry, tears falling and vanishing into steam. She didn't feel abandoned, she felt mortal, capable of losing, capable of choosing. She wrote a new letter, 1 page only. We have been careful with each other, it said. Careful is good, but love also needs boldness. Decide what you want. I will decide too. Meet me here in 1 year, October, when the jacarandas flame. If you come honest. If you don't, we are still blessed. She folded 2 copies, tucked one in the post, one under the stone, and went home lighter, as if she had set down a suitcase she'd been carrying on her head. When October returned, the city wore its annual crown. 1,000 jacarandas spilled their purple grammar across Harare's avenues, commas and ellipses of bloom. Tariro stood under their tree in a white blouse and a skirt her mother had sewn from leftover fabric, the hem neat, the fit perfect. She had decided even if he didn't come, she would mark the day, take tea with the tree, read a page of her favorite book, thank the ground that had held her steady. Footsteps approached, 2 then 1, as if the walker had paused to breathe. She turned. Tendai stood there, slimmer in the face, older at the eyes, a familiar awkwardness in the way he held his hands. No drama, no flowers, just a boy carrying his own decision. I finished my program, he said. I told my parents I'm coming back to build here. Not to impress, just to belong. I don't know the exact map yet. I only know the compass. He swallowed. If your compass still points near mine, I'm here. They sat. They didn't kiss immediately. They talked about work and hope and the price of bread. They laughed about the first bottle caps and the petal jar. They planned nothing grand, only the next week. A volunteer tutoring session at the community hall, a piano recital at a school fundraiser, a visit to her mother's shop with hinges that needed oiling. Before they left, he took a small paper packet from his pocket. Inside lay 3 jacaranda seeds. For the future, he said. Together, they pressed them into a shallow trench near the root, not carving promises into bark but planting them in soil. The wind lifted, smudging the ground with moving shade. The ribbon on the low branch stirred as if nodding. The jacaranda, steady witness to first questions, first answers, first kiss, last morning, stood as it always had, holding purple light. Around them, the city rushed and argued and sold things and learned things. Under the tree, they folded their hands together, a quiet that needed no proof. The witness said nothing, but its branches, heavy with bloom, curved lower, as if to bless what only it had fully seen.